Wednesday, April the 2nd, 2014. Today, it is our honor to interview Interim Dean of the Graduate School, Mary Farmer-Kaiser, who is also the James D. Wilson Board of Regents Support Fund Memorial Professor in Southern Studies and a Professor of History. Dr. Farmer-Kaiser's class was responsible for the first phase in making the Museum on the Move a reality. They were at ground zero. For the record, my name is Ruth Foote, and I'll be conducting the interview. Joining me as videographer is Christian Fontenot. We are both graduate students in Dr. Thomas Covine's Public History class. Good morning, Dr. Farmer-Kaiser.
Good morning.
How would you describe the Museum on the Move and its debut exhibit, Crossing the Line, Louisiana Women in a Century of Change?
That's a big question. I would, describe the Museum on the Move as a brilliant teaching tool. The professors who are responsible for its creation, its development as an exhibit, and really the idea beyond this exhibit, it's a remarkable thing that we can offer our students to essentially have a lab to create an exhibit. The exhibit itself, the Women's History exhibit, I couldn't be more pleased with.
That's somewhat your baby.
In some ways. I mean, it's lots of people's babies.
Mm-hmm.
My class was the Louisiana Women's History course, and we really took on the research base for the exhibit. But what we did was we didn't prepare the exhibit. We really did the research, and we became really vested in Louisiana women's history and the scholarship that's out there. And then we started to really delve deeply into the lives of individual women. And we started with the big question of, well, if we're going to have an exhibit on Louisiana women, who has to be in it, and why? But we ended up with, I think it was 22 biographical sketches. And our class also came up with proposals for an exhibit theme and kind of thinking about how each of these individual women could fit into an exhibit on Louisiana women. But it wasn't the theme that was selected and developed. And so it was really fun and a little bit scary.
Well, I was curious, what did it mean for your students to be involved, and what did it mean for you to be involved? Like, can you take us back to the beginning when you shared with your students what they would be doing this semester?
They were nervous, and they didn't really know what it would ultimately mean, because this was very much a traditional history class. We did a reading seminar, so we did a lot of reading. But their projects over the course of the semester they first really thought of them as research projects, but it wasn't a traditional research paper. They had to write a biographical research paper. But they also had to start thinking about, well, if there were primary sources, what one primary source would you associate with this woman?
Was there anything in particular that surprised you or maybe even disappointed you? I don't know how the class felt. You mentioned just a moment ago that their theme wasn't chosen. Did that have an impact on
Well, we
class?
had 22 different themes. Each individual student, as part of their project, came up with a proposal for a theme, an exhibit theme, but they also had to justify why their woman should be in that theme or any exhibit on Louisiana women. So they had to make a case for why that woman should be in an exhibit. One of the hardest parts of this process was having to not be part of the museum's class, because I knew that they were taking our information, our research, our blood, sweat, and tears, and turning it into something. And I didn't know what they were going to turn it into. And there were a few graduate students that I would inquire with, tried to employ as spies to find out what was going on in that museums class and how they were going to do this and which women they had selected. I didn't know that they would focus on 20th century because there were a lot of colonial and 19th century women who were part of the research projects that my class had undertaken.
Well, from the students' perspective, how did they share some of those feelings about, wow, our stuff is now kind of out of our hands?
Yeah, and they actually signed a release in our class. And I was pleased that they were listed as co-contributors to the exhibit, of course. And that made them excited.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
Proud of it.
From a student perspective, it must have been exciting to know that your work was not in vain.
And there were several who came back for the opening night who had graduated and moved away. And they came back because they wanted to see what was made of it. The biggest surprise, I think, was the 20th century focus to me of the exhibit. And there's a young Ursuline nun who one of our students focused her project on. And this is colonial period, the very beginning of Louisiana. And part of what the Ursulines were very instrumental in was really encouraging education of women and leadership. Leadership in a different kind of way, probably even activism in a different kind of way than we maybe think about today. But these nuns were critical. And this young woman, everybody in our class agreed that you couldn't possibly have an exhibit on Louisiana women without this one woman. And so we were all kind of surprised that she wasn't in the exhibit.
Well, for the record, we're going to document that today. At this moment, we're documenting her. She lives on.
She lives on.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to, in your opinion, what was the challenge of moving from the historical research to the exhibition? You kind of touched on some of it, kind of having to let it go, kind of like a parent sending their child off.
Absolutely.
And not being able to do anything else.
The other challenge that I know was very much a part of it, this class really came out of another project. I'm currently co-editing a volume on Louisiana women for the University of Georgia Press. And this volume is biographical essays, articles on individual women, Louisiana women. And so we really kind of came at it from a biographical, we wanted to do biographies. And I know that posed a real challenge to the class because, they had all of these biographies about individual women, and there might have been a different way that they would have told the story of Louisiana women and activism, but they were really confined by the research that they had. They were really ultimately limited to the biographical approach. And so I think that was probably a challenge for the class. I know that it was a challenge when I talked with Dr. Troutman about it. From my vantage point, I think it was probably harder for him because, he really didn't have any say over what the content of the exhibit was going to be. And so, we handed him literally big stacks of stuff. I think we turned it electronic for him.
It's almost like each one had their piece of the puzzle and then it had to come together.
It absolutely did. But what's the greatest thing about it is because everybody contributed. It's lots of people's baby.
Well, tell me this, when you were mentioning the challenges, what about the time period? Did that put extra pressure on the students that you have a semester and in this semester you have to complete something that's going to live on?
Absolutely. What the museums class was able to accomplish was incredibly remarkable. We had certain challenges within my class, but I don't think they were nearly the pressure that the museums class had. We did a lot of readings, and so I was trying to balance a traditional research class, readings class, with the need to find the stuff, to tell the story of these individual women. And that class ended up being a lot bigger than we had anticipated. We thought it would be a class of 15 to max 17. I think we ended up with 22. And I turned a lot of students away for the class. But that was certainly a challenge. But yeah, the time period that you only have, a finite amount of time a semester to do the research, and then a finite amount of time to not only come up with the exhibit, but to gut that museum, gut that Airstream trailer, to turn it into something. I understand there were some pretty late nights.
I can imagine. And that brings us all to opening night. Tell me your feelings opening night. What was it like to see going from ground zero to being there and seeing it become reality?
Oh, I remember walking up to the museum, and there had been moments where I had seen the museum at various different stages. And I didn't actually say this. One of the first things we did in my Louisiana women's class is we took a field trip over to see the Airstream trailer, to get in the Airstream trailer, to get excited about this project. And
I think we might have a picture or two.
Yeah, I think we do. But when we
Brown.
walked into it, the students went into it, and it still had the kitchenette in it, and the table, and so forth. Hadn't been gutted at all. We didn't realize that we needed a, I don't know what you call it, but a stabilizer. And so when they got into the museum, they all walked to the back, and it just, like a teeter-totter, flipped. I mean, so we learned very quickly that you can't put too many people in the trailer, and they can't walk to one side or the other. There's got to be balance in there. But when I walked up to that trailer that night, I hadn't seen it. I mean, I really hadn't been in the trailer. I didn't know what I don't even think I knew what the exhibit actually was. And so it was excitement. It was a little bit of apprehension. What have they done with our work? I walked up and I saw my students who were there, who had come back for this occasion, and that was exciting, and it was wonderful to see them. And I saw Dr. Troutman and these other professors just beaming. They were so proud, and it was a good crowd there. And Governor Blanco was there. I'm sure she probably had a little bit of apprehension as to what she was going to see in the exhibit too.
Part of it.
But it was just an evening of excitement. I mean, it was outstanding.
What impact do you think that the exhibit will have, and just the museum on the move? What's going to be its biggest impact?
I think that the impact could be on many levels. I think probably the biggest impact just in the immediacy is on the students who are part of the process of creating the exhibit and transforming this Airstream trailer into a museum. I don't have any hesitation that really contributed to their education in a way that you just can't get anywhere else. That it's outside of the classroom, it's creating something from ground zero, as you said, and really seeing it through. So the students, there were a couple of students who were involved in both classes, and I think it has a profound impact on them. I think it also has an impact on the graduate program in the history department in an incredible way. The potential that it has for bringing other faculty members into the public history program. I'm not a public historian. I've always wanted to participate in the public history program. This has allowed me to do that, and I understand that we have a whole line of professors now who are ready to teach the research part, the research class. And they're not public historians, but it allows them to really have a role and to participate. I think that's outstanding. I think that the museum will also have a fantastic opportunity to potentially recruit students to UL. My understanding is the goal is to get it out there at the book festival in Baton Rouge, at various festivals around town. It's already been at the horse farm, but it's also been traveling to schools.
And we were at the Louisiana History Conference.
Absolutely. And so it provides an opportunity to really showcase not only what our students are doing, but what our program is doing, and the really kind of interesting ways this university is willing to teach. And so I'd love to see it everywhere. I'd like to take it wherever we go. I'd like to see it go to high schools. History is oftentimes that major that's thought of that, oh, so you're going to be a teacher. I think this is a prime example of what you can do with a history degree that is very much about education and teaching, but at the same time, I think it can inspire a whole group of students.
The next generation.
The next generation.
Definitely. And concluding, could you tell us, maybe you've been a professor of women history, you specialize in it, you author books on it and edit more to come. Is there any woman in the exhibit that you might relate to, and could you tell us why?
Oh, relate to, wow.
Or a favorite?
Yeah. One, they're on my favorites. There are a couple of women, though, that are in the exhibit that were not subjects of research for my class, and they're not included in the Louisiana Women's volume that we're editing right now, but they are women who we very much would have liked to have had essays written on. So thrilled to see Kathleen Blanco included in the exhibit, and I think it's an important inclusion. We would have liked to have had an essay on her in our Louisiana Women's collection. We were limited, of course, though, in selecting subjects, who have scholars working, actively doing research on them. And unfortunately, there's not a historian really who has undertaken the deep research that needs to be done for a scholarly essay. And so I was happy to see that Dr. Blanco, Kathleen Blanco, Governor Blanco, was included. The one that I was most happy to honestly see, and I guess if there's one that I relate to more than any other, is Lindy Boggs. Lindy Boggs is someone who is deserving of so much more research and writing on. The essay that's in the Louisiana Women's book on her is actually written by a close friend and actually goddaughter of Lindy Boggs, and it's just, she has such a remarkable story, and I think she is underappreciated in our history of the women's movement. The contributions that she made in such an understated way to the advancement of women is pretty remarkable, so I was happy to see her in there. And she's a modern woman. She was a wife and a mother, and I don't know that she would have called herself an activist, at least not in the early parts of her life. After her husband died, and she was forced in some ways to take on mortgages in her own name and so forth, and the fact that she couldn't get a mortgage in her own name really kind of she had certain challenges that lots of women don't anticipate that they're going to have in their lives. And when tragedy struck in her life, she suddenly is a congresswoman. She's suddenly the chair of an incredibly powerful committee. She has children. She has a life in Louisiana and in Washington, D.C. and she's struggling with being a widow. She's a remarkable woman, and that she recently passed away.
Yes.
It's long overdue, so I'm happy that she's in there. But there are truly remarkable women in that exhibit, and when we started that class in Louisiana Women's History, I started by saying, okay, name the women of Louisiana history. Who are the women who have shaped this state? Who are the women that are important to this state? And, you know, of course, we talk about Governor Blanco and so forth, but our students really struggled to name names. And when it came down to, well, there's Britney Spears, that's a devastating thing. If we can't talk about these incredibly important women by name and what they've done and how they've shaped our states, it's a real shame that we can't do that. And so, you know, Rowena Spencer, I mean, there's so many in the exhibit that children in Louisiana, Louisianians, adult and youth, should know these women.
And now they do.
And now they will. And now they will.
Thank you so much, Dr. Farmer-Kaiser.